Hey everyone, I want to break down something that's been confusing a lot of people lately, and honestly, it makes sense why. There's been a major development involving President Donald Trump's tariffs, and this isn't just about trade policy anymore. It's about billions of dollars that have already been collected, and the big question is, who actually ends up with that money? Because here's the surprising part. A large portion of that tariff revenue, which may have indirectly come from everyday Americans through higher prices, might not be going back to consumers at all. And if you've been wondering why certain items feel more expensive lately, or where all that tariff money actually goes, this directly affects your wallet. Let's start simple. What is a tariff? Tariffs can sound complicated, but at their core, they're pretty straightforward. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. When companies bring products into the United States, they pay that tax at the border. On paper, it sounds like foreign companies are footing the bill. But in reality, businesses often pass those added costs down the chain, to wholesalers, retailers, and eventually consumers. So yes, that can mean higher prices for you. Electronics, clothing, household items, even certain foods, tariff costs can quietly get built into the price tag. You don't see a tariff fee line on your receipt. It's just baked in. The Supreme Court ruling on February 20th, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled against a significant portion of President Donald Trump's tariffs. The court determined that the administration's use of emergency powers to impose those tariffs was not legally valid. Their reasoning was essentially this: tariffs function as taxes, and under the Constitution, the authority to levy taxes belongs to Congress, not the president acting alone under emergency law. With that decision, a major group of tariffs was declared invalid. And that leads to the obvious next question: what happens to the money that was already collected? We're talking about roughly $134 billion. Who gets the refund? At first glance, many people assumed that if the tariffs were ruled invalid, that money might somehow flow back to consumers. But here's where things get frustrating. If refunds are issued, they would go to the importers, the companies that paid the tariffs at the border, not directly to consumers. That includes major retailers and manufacturers. Large corporations that imported goods and paid the tariff fees are now filing lawsuits to recover those funds. Think about how that cycle works. Companies pay tariffs. They raise prices to offset the cost. Consumers pay higher prices. If refunds happen, companies, not consumers, receive the money back. Could businesses lower prices afterward? In theory, yes. But there's no guarantee. Companies rarely issue retroactive discounts once pricing has already adjusted. So this is where the debate really heats up. New tariffs, new legal path. After the court ruling, tariffs didn't just disappear. Instead, the administration introduced a new round of tariffs using a different legal authority, Section 122 of the Trade Act. In simple terms, this allows the president to impose temporary tariffs, up to 15%, to address economic concerns like trade imbalances. So while the earlier tariffs were struck down under emergency powers, this new approach is based on a separate legal framework, at least for now. But here's the catch. Trade experts are already suggesting that this new strategy could face legal challenges too. The law being used was originally designed decades ago under a very different economic system. Today's global financial structure operates differently, which raises questions about whether the legal foundation fully fits modern trade realities. So we could potentially see another round of court battles. The broader strategy: there's also a longer-term strategy in play involving Section 301 tariffs. These are more targeted tariffs used after formal investigations into unfair trade practices, such as dumping, when foreign producers sell goods extremely cheaply to undercut domestic industries. Section 301 tariffs are generally considered more legally durable, but they take time. Investigations, reports, formal findings, all of that requires process. So the current tariffs may be functioning as a temporary bridge while longer-term trade policies are developed. Depending on your perspective, that's either strategic planning or ongoing uncertainty. Because for businesses, uncertainty matters. Changing tariff rules affect costs, pricing strategies, hiring decisions, and supply chains. And ultimately, those ripple effects can land back on consumers. Where the money goes. So to bring it back to the main question, who gets the tariff money? Initially, it goes into federal revenue. If courts require refunds, that money would most likely be returned to the importers who paid it, not directly to individuals. Some lawmakers have floated the idea of broader taxpayer rebates if refunds occur, but as of now, that's just a proposal, not an established policy. Legally speaking, since importers paid the tariffs, they're the ones with standing to claim refunds. That doesn't necessarily feel fair to everyone, especially if consumers absorb the higher prices, but that's how the system is structured. The bigger picture. It's also important to remember that tariffs aren't just about collecting revenue. They're used as policy tools. Supporters argue that tariffs can protect domestic industries, encourage U.S. manufacturing, strengthen negotiating leverage in trade agreements. Critics argue that tariffs function like a hidden consumer tax, raising prices and creating economic friction. Both perspectives carry weight. Protecting industries can be important. So can keeping everyday costs manageable. What this means for you in the short term: it means being aware that tariff policy can affect prices, even when it's not obvious. If you run a business, tariffs can directly impact your margins and supply costs. If you're managing a household budget, they can quietly influence what you pay for everyday goods. And when you hear about billions being collected or refunded, it's important to understand how that money actually flows, because it doesn't always circle back to consumers. At the end of the day, tariffs might look like they're aimed at foreign governments, but much of their real impact happens here at home. And as these legal battles continue, this is definitely something worth watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think tariff refunds should go back to companies, consumers, or somewhere else entirely? Let me know.